Hey everybody out there, my name is Dragnix, and today I set my critical eye on the sequel to the most viewed review on this channel, The Witch and the 100 Knight 2. The game releases on March 27th, 2018 on the PS4 in North America, and March 30th for countries in Europe. Our favorite Mute Knight comes back again with a whole new cast of characters in the backdrop of an action RPG setting. But before I begin, a couple of things. This game was received from the publisher, NIS America, for the purposes of review on March 20th, 2018, 6 days before the embargo. Now, that won't change my opinions of the game in the end, but you should know that this is a review copy due to FCC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know. But more than that, realize that these are my first impressions of the game after 25 hours of gameplay, and I believe that I'm about halfway through the game based on the world map and how much I've unlocked, along with the pacing. Now note, these are first impressions. Unlike when I played the first game, I'm doing this part-time, so there was no way I was going to finish an RPG while having a full job in this time frame. However, I will be doing a full review in time, but due to the embargo ending today, I did want to get my first impressions out there for people needing some sort of coverage right away. Because The Witch and the 100 Knight series was a divisive one on its release with certain critics, and there's key changes to the formula of the series here that may influence people to purchase or avoid the title. Let me begin like this. If you're expecting another Metallia and story similar to the first game, 100 Knight 2 is going to disappoint you in certain ways. That's not to say the story here isn't good, but there's a definite shift in tone with the focus of the story being between a pair of sisters, Amelie and Milm, who are not witches. Well, sorta. See, in this game, the idea of being a witch is actually treated more like a plague, or specifically, the witch disease. Young girls can end up being afflicted by the disease and being transformed into vile and nasty witches that will cause major destruction and chaos in their paths. Unfortunately for Amelie, her younger sister Milm is one of the inflicted and transforms into the evil witch Chelka, a young and vile witch who wants to gain power and rule basically everything. The whole supervillain thing. Now, there are a lot of subplots that get introduced and interconnected here. You've got the Holy Valkyries and their mission to defeat witches and cure witch disease once and for all. You've got the dynamic of Chelka and Milm, as Milm is somehow alive somehow after the transformation, which is a first in this world. This plot is the core to the story, however, and it leaves Amelie in a very particular spot. She's a Holy Valkyrie apprentice, and she's torn between the love of her sister and keeping her safe, and her duty to the Holy Valkyries and eliminating witches. The story feels so different from the original Witch and the 100 Knight in so many ways, even down to some of the core concepts, and I'm really torn by this. The darkness of Metallia in the original game was one that I loved, because her story made a lot of sense when you sat down and thought about it. Was she nasty? Yeah. Was she vile? Yeah, she was. To the point where you got uncomfortable playing her at times. The things she would do would be condemned in the current culture of political correctness. But it was her lack of a role model and learning on her own that made her interesting. She was never taught what good and evil was, and that was part of the story. Some critics did not see it that way, and thus condemned the game. It does make me wonder a tiny bit how much that backlash affected this story. Don't get me wrong, if you're expecting some darkness in this game, you will get it, but it's not like the first. Amelie's presence is the big factor here. She is your heroine, and really when I think about it, the main character, even over Chelka and the 100 Knight. She is inherently good. She knows the basics of right versus wrong, but gets put into situations that test her morality and puts her beliefs to the test. She's sort of like Visco in the first game, but the game revolves around her this time and really is from her perspective. But here's the thing. Despite these changes, this story does still work and keep me entertained. It's definitely more formulaic, but don't take that as being a typical JRPG story about a bright-eyed protagonist saving the world. The game introduces a couple of twists here and there that make me want to finish the game from a sheer curiosity perspective on where it could go. The thing is, it sets up a lot of plot points, and the fact that they could go down some very dark routes, or even some very light routes, yeah, that makes me want to push forward. Amelie is the example here again. She's a good character, a tortured character, and yet there are these moments that make you feel like you're missing something. There's a moment early on where her love for her sister gets a little creepy, to say the least, to the point where I was a little bit uncomfortable, reminding me of the first game. I thought that, no, I must be looking into it a little bit too much. I know that could be a stereotype in certain areas of Japanese culture, but I must be looking too closely considering the first game. But then there was another revelation that came to make me think that, well, wait, maybe they're setting something up here. Now, it's possible in the second act everything plays out as normal and none of these things come to fruition. But given the game's history, in particular the first game and what it told, I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt right now. There just seems to be too much foreshadowing for me to ignore here, and that kind of foreshadowing, yeah, it gets me wanting to play the game more. Next, there are some good sub-characters and interesting backstories. Several of the Holy Valkyries draw your attention, such as Zophie, the half-machine soldier with a huge coffin hammer, or Lisa, the succubus-type nurse that makes you wonder what she's obviously hiding under the surface. Really, the whole cast of the Holy Valkyries add a good dynamic to the game as a whole, acting as this good, yet not good, yet not evil organization that you know will probably turn out evil in the end. But maybe it could be good with good intentions in the process. Here's the thing, the game makes it out that the witches here are bad. And to be fair, given the witches in this game, yeah, they are. In the first, you could make arguments about whether or not they were necessarily bad in some scenarios, but not here. So the idea of having to deal with new possible witches, cures for the witch disease, and the struggles of making tough decisions, that makes the Holy Valkyries an interesting group. One that you'll wonder where the plot will take them to. What's weird, however, is that the weakest part of the game's characters are the witches themselves. Sure, you get a witch like Prim that puts vanity over everything else and makes an interesting dynamic with her citizens. But then there's witches like Isabel, who really just sort of exist as a bad guy. That's it. Even Chelka, while having the connection to Milm and being so young yet so powerful, doesn't come off well personality-wise compared to Natalia in the first game. In fact, she feels like a knockoff version of her. This is one of those rare occurrences where playing the first game may make the second experience worse, because you feel like you're comparing characters with similar personalities to each other, and Chelka just doesn't stand up to the might of Natalia. Who does stand out, however, is the comic relief character, Hunan Mugen, a drag queen mutated butler raven with a southern accent. I did not know I needed a character like this in my life, but lo and behold, he works so well and has a reasonable voice actor putting his lines together. Honestly, this really shouldn't work when I think about it. I don't usually like characters who feel like they are comedy for the sake of comedy to be inserted into the story just because, but Hunan Mugen is the exception. Just take a listen to a few clips here. You'll understand why.
My, you're in a good mood, Chelka. That's Master Chelka to you. You want to get the riding crop again?
Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Slip of the tongue. I swear it.
I'll forgive you just this once. I'm in a very good mood today. Hunin Mugen, I remember you saying something about treats for the tea?
I'm making sweet boiled manna flour, just like you asked. But it's gonna take me just a bit longer to prepare. Squawk! She what? Did that girl take my story seriously and run off to a video? Magic crystals are just stuff from storybooks. Oh no, 100 Knight? I bet she saw that you were real and thought that other fairy tale stuff might be real too. What do I do? And a video of all places. It's a hellhole.
All right. I've talked about the story enough. It's time to discuss a little bit about the gameplay. This is an action RPG with hack and slash mechanics, and there's several holdovers from the original game. Your character has 3 loadouts with 5 weapons each, where 100 Knight will pull out one weapon after another in quick succession. Very similar to the first game with the weapon types too here, as the game follows a basic 3 damage element system: slash, blunt, and magic, with enemies having resistances and weaknesses to each of the types. Now, weapons will be normally attuned to specific types, such as a sword being mostly a slashing weapon, but you will find magic swords out there, or blunt lances along the way. But there's something very different this time around in your weapon loadouts, because of the introduced facet system. Consider facets like fighting styles, each with their own unique skill sets along with strengths and weaknesses. For example, you have the Power Fortress, which does well with hammers and lances and focuses on strong armor, but sucks against magic attacks and can be slept a little easier. Meanwhile, you have the Assassin facet, which loves using swords and hates using magic along with guarding against poison, but is weaker overall defensively. Almost immediately, we hit another mixed bag when it comes to the changes from the original game. One of the things I really liked about the first 100 Knight is that combos could be kept going even if you changed weapon sets mid-combo, meaning that players could get really creative in switching to the right weapon with different enemies and weaknesses. That is not possible in the new game from what I've played so far, and with each facet liking particular weapons, that means that combos usually involve the same weapon type unless you get those rare weapons with unique qualities. On the other hand, the restrictions here actually add a bit of more strategy to the mix. I mean, I know that staffs do weaker on the Assassin, for example, but maybe there's a specific staff that works well with the rest of the swords I got spatially for the combo. It forces me to think about how I construct each facet and which ones I take with me, and whether I make them clearly one element or be a lot more flexible overall. In addition, I like that skills are bound to each facet and can be leveled up separately, and the skill sets are actually rather important when it comes to taking down baddies. You will become dependent on certain skills to take on certain enemy types in the game, such as the full smash skill to help take out giant golems. On the other hand, I find some of the skill elements to be uneven. The marginal gaze skills are well balanced in my mind, with the fire pillars acting as a good zoning tactic, while the lightning has good risk and reward with the power that it gives in exchange for its casting time. With that said, Wonder Knight's skill set, well, you'll be using Ceaseless Slash a hell of a lot for sheer power purposes. Let's actually talk about the base combat a bit. You'll run into enemies who have 1 or 2 weaknesses and fight patterns that are very specific to that enemy type, whether they throw projectiles at you or try to get into your face. They are pretty basic when it comes to AI implementation, and really seems to be purposeful that way. They are more designed to punish you being stupid more than anything else, although there are enemies that do start to branch out in the later game, at least at the halfway mark. It's very easy at first to think that the combat in 100 Knight is repetitive, and to be honest, very easy. Your speed compared to enemies is so large that, well, you can run past pretty much everything not even fighting it. Playing keep away with enemies can be really easy in the early going, to the point where you're wondering, when is the game going to really challenge you? Sure, you may die once or twice, but that's more a misstep more than anything else, or not understanding an enemy's range. The game is very deceptive, however, because yeah, sure, you can run past those enemies, but you're really not going to want to, because you will need all the experience you can later on when you get to that mini-boss enemy, or specifically the bosses in the game. But more on that later. Here's what I'll say to players. Use this option right here. The game is at its best when you've got a challenge. When you're struggling to get to the next checkpoint in an area, barely having enough gigacalories to spare. Actually, I should talk about that, shouldn't I? Basically, gigacalories are a timer of sorts. As you go along, it will slowly drain, and if you get to 0, well, don't get to 0 because you'll basically be energyless, and you really don't want that. Here's the thing about gigacalories. It would be a great mechanism of sorts if there was a little bit more oomph behind the consequences of failing or being at low gigacalories and feeling the stress of it. Keyword there is stress. Yeah, when things were stressful and you were very close to the end, but needed to conserve your calories, things might have been scary if you couldn't just run by everything. The problem is a little bit more unique to The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2 as opposed to the first game, because of the location and the lack of traps that you could see with the first game. Here, if you get low, just run by everything to get to your destination. That's it. Even when you get somewhat out of the forest and you get to new areas, there doesn't seem to be traps which stopped that in the first game a little bit and made you slow down so enemies could get at you. It makes me question the mechanism as a whole. Like, the developers liked the idea, but were afraid that people wouldn't like the idea, and thus didn't fully go through with a harsh punishment system as a result. I like the concept, but it feels mismanaged in this system here, especially when you can't use it as an ultimate form like you did in the first game, going Super Saiyan, of course. That's managed by a whole new gauge now, and there was something to activating it in the first game in that right situation before. Take for example the new Let system, which allows you to finish off an enemy and gain some gigacalories and ability points when you hit them with a finishing blow. The idea of keeping a run going with the mechanism is great in gigacalories, where you stay at high values because you're finishing off enemies and getting them into the right spot. It would reward players who set up their combos so they hit those enemies at the right time. But with the gigacalories, it feels almost unnecessary given the actual usage of the calories themselves. Now, granted, you'll still want to do this because you get those ability points and can go past your 100 limit, getting 120, 140, and some enemies do go down very easily when you use a certain ability. It may sound like I'm sort of dumping on the gameplay, and don't get me wrong, it has flaws, but I do think the game works in a couple of areas gameplay-wise, and a very specific type of player will enjoy it. One that, to be frank, should be familiar with Nippon Ichi titles. Micromanaging players who love to maximize builds and spend a lot of time in the game. The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2 not only has a drop system, but it allows you to level and fuse that equipment to get even better equipment. You use the mana you gain from enemies that drop it, and use ingredients and other weapons to enhance your weapons in your arsenal, making them stronger and better. You can even get more specialized with specific reagents later in the game to add additional bonuses on top of it. And this is where the game shines, in my opinion. Well, mostly. When you're struggling in an area and then grind a bit to get new equipment and make new loadouts, yeah, you feel like a badass when those enemies that were kicking your ass are now having trouble even touching you. It's been a while since I've seen a game feel like it's that reliant on its equipment to become a better player, but lo and behold, The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2 does that. Now, I do wish the menus and the implementation of this crafting was a bit cleaner, as trying to find the right reagent that gets extra experience for weapons can be a nightmare. I also wish I could equip weapons in the fusing screen, but the internal accountant of me loved finding the new legendary weapon, fusing a bunch of shit to it, and then finding the way to use it in a battle going forward. Hell, I want to give a bit of praise for the weapons themselves, as they do all serve reasonably different purposes, and are relatively well balanced with each other. The two-pronged lances, for example, do a little less damage, but recover AP a lot faster. Vice versa, the hammers do tons of damage, but you shouldn't be relying on AP anytime soon. You really have to think about each weapon you put in there rather than just throw the strongest items on there that you have, especially as there is a ranking weapon system here, and a level 3 legendary doesn't necessarily beat a level 4 rank epic weapon at first. Maybe down the road, but you'll have to put a lot of love into the weapon for it to happen. Then the best part of combat takes advantage of this: the boss fights. Simply put, the boss fights on this game are on another level compared to the more grindy hack and slash portions. Boss fights are long with harder to dodge enemy attacks. You have to be a lot more patient, and the gigacalorie meter actually makes a difference in most cases due to how long the fights are. You have to be slow and patient, but also attack at the right times. And frankly, 99% of your deaths will probably come from these fights. You feel like the game is actually trying to kill you, and that's refreshing. Now, I am at the halfway point of the game, and I'm noticing that the game is ramping up the enemy AI, even with the common enemies, a little bit more, as well as a little bit more map configuration, which was pretty much all forests that started to blend together before this. This section has given me the most trouble up to this point, and I feel like the game is starting to ramp things up a little bit higher. So I will say that even though I gave a bit of an opinion here on the gameplay, I will get a better idea of it overall when I do the full review. But it's a touch up from The Witch and the Hundred Knight. Maybe not a huge jump up, but enough where you do notice some quality of life improvements. As for my overall opinion, if I were to score the game right now, it'd be somewhere in the 78-82 range, with some reasonable enhancers for people who've played Nippon Ichi games before, and dehancers for those needing a lot more variety. Now, this is not as divisive as the original game. It also doesn't necessarily have those ties that make you want to dive into it like the original game did, in particular with Metalia. But the dynamic with Amelie and Milm, the whole idea of the Holy Valkyries, and the slight gameplay improvements, yeah, this seems to be a solid RPG, a solid action RPG. However, the ending and the last half is going to make a huge difference, and I see it going upward in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the difficulty, and in terms of the story's conclusion. So I could see it going to around an 85 right now. When the review will come out, when it gets done. I am going to slow down a little bit over the next 2 weeks because after the whole top 10 list and just putting a hell of a lot of time into this, I need to put some more emphasis on some personal things that I need to take care of. I will be going on vacation in April, and well, I need to get some stuff done before then. But if you have any questions about the game, I will answer them completely in the comments section below. Even if it's a general opinion, whether it be, how's the presentation, how's the music, how's the sound, anything like that, leave the questions in the comments section below. Anyway, this is Dragnix signing out for now, and expect my full review in the next couple weeks. Later.